and welcome to Always Take Notes.
If you're a budding writer, you'll be excited to hear that this week's sponsors are Curtis Brown Creative, the renowned writing school affiliated to the major literary agency.
Since launching in 2011, over 160 of their students have gone on to get major book deals, including critically acclaimed authors Bonnie Garmus, Jane Harper, and Kirsty Capes.
CBC offers a wide range of online writing courses designed to help you no matter what your current skill level is. For people at the start of their writing journey, they have a 4-week Creative Writing for Beginners course led by author and founder of CBC, Anna Davis. The course will teach you to unleash the potential of your imagination. You'll gain the confidence to put pen to paper and get to work on a story of your own creation.
Plus, all students will be given the opportunity to get individual feedback from one of CBC's expert fiction editors.
Visit www.curtisbrowncreative.co.uk to find out more about all the courses on offer.
Curtis Brown Creative have provided an exclusive discount for Always Take Notes listeners. You can use the code ATN20 for £20 off the full price of Creative Writing for Beginners or any other 4 or 6 week online writing course. Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, we speak to the novelist and screenwriter Irvine Welsh.
We spoke to Irvine about the impact of train spotting, about getting into the minds of violent characters, and about why he doesn't have a literary agent.
It's a great episode, and we hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Irvine, to Always Take Notes. It's fantastic to have you on the show. Could we start with your new book, The Long Knives, which follows filth and crime? Why did you feel the time was right to return to the character of Ray Lennox?
I think, if you're looking quite cynically at it, it was because we'd done Crime as a TV show, and it was kind of, I thought if I'm going to write a second season, I might as well do it as a book to give myself a template for it. But it's like these things it's never one thing or the other with these things, really. When we started to adapt crime for TV, you get you get immersed in the character again. You want to know what kind of happens next, basically. You're just sort of kind of like everybody else, really. So I was thinking, well, what could happen next? What else could he do? What could we give him to do that would be interesting? But also, what could you give him to do that would kind of further sort of solve his own mystery of his past and his kind of coming to terms with what's happened to him?
Could you tell listeners who aren't familiar with him a bit more about your central character here and about how you've gone about exploring Lennox in this book?
Yeah, I mean, Lennox is he's basically this very kind of damaged kind of guy. He's a cop, but only nominally. He's not really sort of invested in being a police officer. He's more interested in sort of working out some kind of personal sort of vengeance that against a section of a world, i.e. kind of abusers who've treated him badly. So he's kind of he is a kind of avenging angel sort of character rather than a sort of a straight annoying cop.
What do you like about writing the crime and thriller format, both across TV and in novels?
It makes writing something quite. It's quite in some ways it's an easier thing to write than sort of standard kind of literary fiction. In other ways, it's more difficult. It's easier because there are kind of there's a lot of certain rules that you have to follow. So you've got a kind of framework basically before you even start, which is which is kind of lends itself to a 3-act structure, kind of both in book and TV. It's more difficult because it's harder in a way to come up with something that is interesting within that. You're not kind of sort of you're not kind of doing your kind of free-form jazz that you do in literary fiction. You get this mess and you try and tease it into something that's a sort of that makes sense. Whereas this one, with this kind of thing, you're much more focused and much more on on what you have to do and where you have to go with the character. And you're much more kind of you have much more of a notional audience in mind, basically, when you do this kind of thing.
With other crime writers we've had on, I'm thinking particularly of Ian Rankin and Val McDermid, a big point for them has been research and how they go about accessing the world of law enforcement and things like that, or choose not to, and also at what stage in their process they do that research. And I know Rankin told us that he had this kind of change early in his career from doing loads and loads of research and then writing to to turning it the other way around, because you said that in the end you would spend months looking into stuff that didn't end on the floor. I mean, what is your process there in terms of getting the material and getting into that world?
I'm not really good at researching. I tend to just write the thing and then look at what I need to authenticate it or not. I mean, I like the idea that this is not the real world. I'm not trying to make it into any kind of sort of facsimile of the real world. It's just totally out my imagination. So I like kind of doing things like misnaming streets and stuff like that, and kind of making my own districts in town sometimes, mixing them up with the real places and all that. So I think that's part of the fun for me, so I'm not massively driven to authenticating sort of things like that. But I think procedures, I think it's like certain processes and procedures that, that basically that kind of cops kind of undertake and do in terms of crime and all that. But again, I'm not massively invested in those. I think that I think if I can kind of, I always think about, well, what would I don't really kind of visit like pathologists and all that kind of stuff. I think, well, what would these guys logically do? How would this work out? And I kind of wait for somebody else to tell me, well, that's not really that's not really how it would happen. Like, it's easier on TV because you're with a bunch of people and you've got a kind of, you have advisors and all that and sort of consultants to keep you right, and they're very informative and interesting. So I do tend to take notes of them. But when I'm writing a novel, I just kind of basically want it to be my kind of own prejudices, really.
So who would the people be that you would show it to that might point out something that needs to be changed?
I think it's usually at the editing stage. The editor will say, well, is this, they'll go through it and say, well, this isn't really right, this wouldn't happen, and can you change this? And I'll sort of go, oh, do we have to? It's like I kind of, the way I kind of perceive it is kind of real to me. Like, they say, well, it won't be real to the readers and all that. So yeah, you have that kind of trade-off, basically.
I was thinking also of an interview we did with David Baldacci, who doesn't write straight crime, but is sort of firmly in that thriller mode. And he put its appeal in a kind of moral framework. He said, look, like in the real world, people do bad stuff and get away with it all the time. And what he wants to construct is a kind of environment of just desserts that provides that that kind of resolution, which he thinks is something that readers find very satisfying. I mean, how do you feel about you've mentioned this avenging angel idea, but the kind of moral landscape that you're creating?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to show the consequences of. You can show extreme behaviours, but you have to show the consequences of that behaviour on the person who's perpetrating it, and also the people who are subject to that kind of behaviour. So, I think that's to me is the sort of the moral imperative of it. You needn't necessarily resolve anything to the satisfaction of society in general, and I think that as long as people can see that it's not so much like about an individual as such, or about kind of the bad behaviour of an individual. It's about to me it's all the kind of daft decisions that we make, and all the constraints on our choices, and the way that we get kind of the way the world traps us and forces up these bad decisions on us a lot of the time, and we're struggling to, we're in the dark and we're struggling for the light switch. And I think you can show as much darkness as you like, but you have to show people kind of going towards the light switch, or at least hoping for it.
So when it comes to plotting, are you more character-led rather than sort of creating an outline ahead of time? Do you kind of try and immerse yourself in the sort of head of the character and see where their decision-making takes you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more character-led than I'm plot-led, but there comes a time when you have to sort of, you have to literally get onto the drawing board, and you have to sort of start pinning stuff to the wall and look at how this is all working out or how it isn't working out, because you do have to have a kind of, you have to have a story that grips people, that, and that can be generated from the character, but there are times when you have to sort of start to kind of craft and chip away at that a little bit to make it flow.
We wanted to come back to The Long Knives in due course, but can we at this stage roll back to your early life and to your interest in storytelling as a child? And we saw this line that you'd said it was growing up surrounded by storytellers, your dad and your brother, and then this idea of being within this Celtic oral storytelling tradition, and then also the role of pubs when you got older. Could you unpack that for us of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is a sort of environment, or it was an environment. I don't think a lot of people do that now, but I think they still do kind of sort of tell tales in pubs and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's it's part of social life, and it's very much part of the it's part of British social life in general, but it's very much particularly pronounced in sort of that Celtic oral storytelling tradition in Scotland. So it's you grow up surrounded by kind of people that are always anxious to tell a tale. I mean, I was in the pub the other day there with a bunch of pals, and they were just they're all storytellers. Like they don't write them down, but there's much storytellers as I am, basically.
And you've also said that to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. Were you a voracious reader as a youngster?
Yeah, I mean, I got to it quite late. I mean, I kind of I was sort of in my teens, really, sort of about kind of 17, 18 before I really took an interest in fiction, and I just went crazy for it. And just sort of I just read everything that I could.
And in that environment you're growing up with quite high levels of deprivation and things like that, how were you getting access to books?
I was quite fortunate because, well, what happens in if you're brought up in a council scheme, there's not a great deal of space, and you don't collect books, you don't have bookcases and stuff like that. But books tend to circulate. It's like one person will have a copy of something that'll be a kind of cool book, and it'll just circulate around with your pals and all that. And I mean, my uncle Jack was he was a fireman, and he did an Open University degree, and I kind of inherited all his books basically. So that was kind of interesting. He was doing a kind of literature course, and he was kind of reading Evelyn Waugh and all this kind of stuff. So I inherited all that kind of stuff from him.
And can you tell us now about the kind of period from your late teens, your kind of early jobs as an apprentice TV repairman, and then your kind of entry into the punk scene in London?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of I did the City and Guilds sort of course at Telford College to become a apprentice TV technician, and I mean, I was totally unsuited for the job. It was like and it was totally unsuited for most jobs, and I think that's how you become, a writer or a musician or whatever. It's because you're not really a 9 to 5 type person, but I went down to London to. I mean, I was fortunate that I had relatives in London, and I was used to going down there in the summer holidays, so it was a kind of home from home for me. So it was great when all this stuff was kicking off down there in the late '70s, and so it's like a great thing to be part of. You meet a lot of people in that environment that some of them are kind of still friends to this day, and some of them you meet a lot of very sort of creative and interesting people, right through punk and right through Acid House. So yeah, I mean, it's really, really lucky. It was kind of the best thing that I did was going down and getting into that scene.
Is it correct that you had this experience getting electrocuted, and that was a bit of a impetus to take a different direction?
Yeah, it wasn't really an impetus to take a different direction, but it did sort of help me with a book I wrote called Maribou Stock Nightmares when the guy was in a coma. I mean, I wasn't in as seriously sort of ill as that guy, but I was sort of out for the count. It's like kind of a bit like being on the general anaesthetic when you sort of you have all these mad kind of sort of dreams, and and then you're back into a sort of reality. So I wanted to get to that kind of I wanted to use that sort of split levels of consciousness, basically.
Could we move on now to the kind of path to publication of Trainspotting? When did you decide to write it, and how did you go about doing it? I read somewhere that you gave yourself 18 months once you'd sort of alighted on the idea to complete it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of sort of, I failed as a musician, and I tried to sort of do things in bands, and it wasn't really going anywhere. And I thought, well, you've written a lot of ballads basically, which are just stories, without, I thought, try writing these stories without music, and don't think about them being set to music. Just write them basically. And I'd kind of written a lot of I'd started to kind of keep a journal, and kind of was just like a diary with all different sort of little kind of stories and sort of nonsense in it and doodlings and all that. And I thought, well, there's some interesting stuff there, or at least, I mean, I don't know if it was interesting, but I kind of found it interesting. So I started to take stuff out of that, and to kind of use that. And I realised that I was writing in different voices, basically. There were voices that were coming through, and I thought, well, who are these voices? What are they saying and all that? What kind of characters can I flesh out from these voices? So it just started from there, really.
And is it right? Was it at this period that you had this experience getting injured on a bus to a football match and then got a compensation payment that you were able to flip through some houses to? Was that at this point that gave you a bit of financial space
that
to
was
focus on the book?
80s. I was that kind of that gave me a bit of direction, really. It was like another. I think these things do. I think these are the kind of events that you think to yourself, like, God, I got out of jail here a little bit. I've got to sort of I've got to think about what I'm doing in my life. It was a sort of, it was a kind of interesting thing that happened to me, because I did get compensation. Well, not a great deal of money, but it was enough to get me to buy me a small flat. I got a deposit on a small flat in Amherst Road in Hackney, and then it was like the property was going pretty crazy in North London at the time. So I was able to sort of to get to sort of make a bit of cash by doing that.
And in terms of writing in dialect, I was interested to see that you've kind of compared the vernacular to kind of a musical rhythm. Could you unpack that idea for listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time when I was writing, I was raving a lot. I was going out to these big warehouse parties and to the parties and farms with sound systems and all that. I started to get involved in promotion of these parties and a bit of DJing as well. So I was like, I was immersed in music, and I was specifically immersed in the 4/4 beat. The idea that everything had this bit of funk to it, and I liked it. I liked the kind of I almost wanted to write in that kind of rhythm so that people would turn over the page, and I thought, and they would just feel that kind of the music in it, And I always thought that the oral storytelling tradition, was very rhythmic. It was very sort of it has almost a 4/4 beat on it, So that was that I wanted to try and replicate that. So I thought the vernacular was much easier than standard English to do that, because it's English is a great language, but it's very much an imperialist kind of controlling language. It's all kind of weights and measures and sort of pounds and pence and stuff like that. So I wanted something that was a bit funkier, and I feel that vernacular and slang is much more like that, basically. So that was the basis of what I wanted to write, and it was also the characters were coming to me with that voice. It seemed a bit pretentious to kind of sort of to do it in standard English. From there I went on to, I thought, well, I've got the beat now. How do I get the effects on top? So I started doing all the typographical experiments. But, not so much in Trainspotting, but a little bit, but mainly with the other books. And I started to kind of have words falling off the page, and have kind of like experiment with typeface, and just mess around really to get that sort of dislocating element, that would sort of be on top of the 4/4 beat.
And was it at this period pre-Trainspotting that you were also working in local government? And if so, how did that element of your life fit with the music and with the developing on your fiction?
With a bit of difficulty, really, because there wasn't a great deal of time to do all those things. And I mean, I did a lot of writing when I should have been working, basically. But one of the things that working for local government, one of the things that did give me is the ability to smash out loads and loads of words. Because what happens with if you write a report that the council have to read and kind of vote on, you have to summarise it in one page, in the top page, because that's all they're going to read. They're not going to read that, but all that stuff, they don't. They just won't look at it at all. But you have to have it, and the bigger the report, the more chance it is of getting passed. So if you really want a piece of sort of local kind of legislation passed through the council, you have to just knock out words and knock out words and knock out words. And that's that I became quite adept at just knocking out sort of words, which are a lot of nonsense, really. A lot of absolute shite, but get the words down. And that's one of the things that it stood me in good stead, is the ability to just knock out stacks and stacks of words. Because one of the things I realised as a writer, that you've got to do quite a lot of bad writing before you get to good writing. You have to dig through this sort of through this coal face before you get to a kind of sort of rich seam of something that's usable. And I think the ability to do that is a really good thing for a writer, and that's what I kind of got from working in local government.
We like to lift the lid on the podcast on the kind of writing industry as a whole. So once you'd bashed out your manuscript, how did you set about getting it published? Did you find an agent, or did you just go straight to publishers?
No, I've never had an agent. I've just I've done it all myself basically, and I was fortunate because there's a guy at Cape at the time was Robin Robertson, and he was the managing editor there. He was Scottish, and he had a massive interest in Scottish fiction, particularly this new wave of Scottish fiction that was coming out. People like Duncan MacLean and Barry Graham, and then later kind of Alan Warner and Kevin Williamson, and so there was a sort of a bit of a sort of movement there, basically, in a sense, and I got to know these people, and it was like through basically through Duncan that I got in touch with Robin, and Robin got in touch with me basically, and I published a couple of short stories, and he said, these are great stories. Have you got anything else? I said, I've got a novel, which was a lie. Basically, I never really had a novel at the time. But he said, oh, I'd love to see it. I said, well, I'm just still working on it. I'll be ready in a couple of months, So I thought I better batter all this stuff into some kind of shape, So it incentivized me to do it, to finish the novel. Well, that I was kind of embryonically kind of working on.
Fascinating to hear that, because I think in the entire history of the podcast, and we've had a lot of novelists on, I think you're the only novelist with unagented novelist that we've ever had. And a lot of writers talk about getting an agent as a critical first step and things like that. And I'm fascinated as to how did you feel that you were kind of able to feel your way through both the kind of technical contractual stuff and the sort of fighting your own corner and getting a fair deal? Because presumably you must have had agents kind of knocking on your door and offering their services.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of I knocked them all back. I thought I'll just do this myself, because again, working in local government, I was involved in kind of the competitive tendering, so I was used to sort of looking at contracts, and I was doing an MBA at the time, so I had quite a sort of kind of decent business head on me, and all you do, with these things, you just ask for more money every time until they say no, basically, and then you kind of you sort of you go back and you hope that they'll kind of they'll reconsider and all that. So yeah, I mean, I think I probably would have been quite a decent agent actually if I'd been an agent myself. And I think nowadays, I mean, we're going back 30 years of different times, and I think now it'd be quite difficult to operate without an agent. If there was a new writer starting out now, I'd be looking for a decent agent probably. But back then, you could get away with it. I've kind of gotten away with it since then. I think maybe I should get somebody and all that. But it's I think the fewer people you have to deal with, the better. And that's what agents kind of sort of you think that sometimes you think I've got agents for film and TV and in America and in the UK, and they're great. But the idea that you necessary, I think you need it in these environments because it is so corporate, it's so kind of factored in. Publishing, you probably do need it now as well, but I got by without it, so I've kind of I've stuck to that since, basically.
And when Trainspotting was published in 1993, how quickly did it sell, and what difference did the film adaptation make on sales?
Yeah, I mean, it sold quite well from word of mouth, but the funny thing was I had the Acid House out about 6 months after it, which is quite a short time in publishing terms, so I kept pushing them to bring out the Acid House, and I think because of the title and the cover, and because the rave culture was big then, the Acid House actually initially sold more in the first year than Trainspotting, and but when people backed into Trainspotting from the Acid House, it seemed there was there's two things happening. It's like the kind of a lot of my pals in Scotland were reading it, and a lot of the kind of basically kind of people in prisons were reading it and passing it around and all that. It had a big word of mouth kind of cachet. But the second people who were reading it were kind of a lot of old kind of ex-punks in the London cognoscenti who were now into journalism and sort of broadcasting and all that, and they kind of embraced it and took it on, and that was so it's basically sort of my kind of two tribes really, sort of had picked up on it, and then once you get that, the students follow, and then that becomes a thing after that.
What was it like kind of emotionally being at the center of that storm of publicity. And then also, do you think the way that Trainspotting took off, as you say, kind of word of mouth in parallel but separate communities, could that happen today now with the internet and social media and stuff like that? Or do you think that was also a function of its time?
I think very much a function of its time. I think word of mouth was really important. It was a big thing, and there's a real, you could get a real buzz created about something. But it's like it's very, now it's more of an Instagram sort of media type culture that we're into, and it doesn't quite lend itself to that sort of it's like it's something that's a bit less embedded about it. You can you're trying to start off that kind of that sort of avalanche, or what the Americans call the sort of water cooler moment. You're trying to kind of get that kind of thing going, but you don't really. It's what people are in their little clusters and their sort of WhatsApp groups and all that. So you don't really have a sort of a kind of broad brush thing until the mainstream media sort of pick up on it. So it is much more difficult now, and because it is much more of a top-down culture rather than bottom-up culture, and it's increasingly like that. So it's very difficult to. I think for younger writers, it's very difficult because you're expected to write in a certain way. You're almost expected to write into a sort of a retail-driven marketing hole. There's literally marketing holes on the shelf, telling you to write. Crime or romance or thriller or horror or sort of or historical fiction. When I started out, obviously it was just fiction and non-fiction. So this has been another thing that's it's kind of it's changed the way we write. Basically, I think another thing is like the MFA program, the idea that a lot of writers go through a formal training as writers, which is kind of seems to be quite a strange thing.
What did you make at the time of critics saying that that they felt the novel glamorized drug abuse?
It was I mean, I thought it was. You question to what extent people have actually read a book like that if you think it glamorizes drug abuse. So I didn't really take it seriously. I mean, I didn't really take them seriously. Anybody who made a comment like that, I thought, you've not read it, but you don't understand what's going on.
They've certainly not read the scene with the toilet anyway.
Yeah.
It's a rule of the podcast that we always ask about money and how it's interfaced with people's writing lives. So be as candid or as guarded as you want, but particularly at this moment when Trainspotting exploded, and then throughout your career, I suppose both before and after, how has the financial side worked, and how have you kind of managed and that part of it?
Been really, really fortunate, because all you want to do as a writer is to have the chance to write, basically, to just to not have to go to work, support your writing. And very few writers get that privilege, and that to me is like, I've had that, so I was able to basically retire at 30 to pursue my interests, and my hobbies, but so it was a very privileged position that I've been in and still am in, and for that I'm incredibly grateful. But it has worked out well. You have kind of projects that are very, very lucrative and financially successful. You have other ones that aren't so lucrative and financially successful, and you don't really. You basically just you send them out there, whether it's a book or a film or whatever, or a TV show. You send it out there into the marketplace. You don't know how it's going to do, and sometimes it does very well and captures the imagination. Other times, people just think, well, we'll pass on this one and all that. So, that, which is, again, it's fair enough. So over the piece, I've done very, very well financially out writing, and I've been very fortunate to be able to do that.
You released Marabou Stalk Nightmares in 1995, so quite quickly after Trainspotting. Some novelists who've had a massive smash hit debut, I know Acid House followed quite quickly after that, so maybe this helped, but was there ever a sense that it was going to be hard to follow up on Trainspotting? Creatively, did you struggle to get words on the page, or not really?
Yeah, I did. I had a terrible. I mean, I didn't. I wrote a really shit book after Trainspotting, which was kind of an experimental novel. Whenever you say to your publisher you're writing an experimental novel, you just see the colour drain from their face and all that, and they start they pull away the kind of the a la carte menu and put the set menu in front of you, basically. and the How the Wine List and all that kind of stuff. So when you have the success that I had with the first two books, you think you can do anything basically. So I kind of did things like I photocopied my gospel 50 times and put that as, these were 50 pages in the book, and, nonsense like that. I'd ask somebody to write me a poem about something and stick that in the book and all, it was like, it was a mess, basically. It was an incoherent kind of piece of drivel. And, like Robin, who was my editor at the time, he said, "This is just rubbish, it's just nonsense." Basically, there's nice bits and pieces in there, interesting bits and pieces in there, but, find, stop showing off, basically. Just find what you want to write about, and think about something you're really passionate about and want to talk about. And I went back to the drawing board, basically, and I wrote Marabou Stop Nightmares. But in a way, I think that, which was probably one of my best novels, maybe my best in some ways, but it wouldn't have come out. The lesson for me was that I shouldn't have tried to publish that nonsense. But I was correct to write that nonsense, basically, because that was, that kind of enabled and kind of begat that process of writing Marabou Stop Nightmares. So I think, you have to sort of, I think as a writer, you have to distinguish between kind of writing and publishing. You can sometimes you're writing to find what you're writing about, basically.
Hello, it's Artemis, the producer of Always Take Notes. I hope you're enjoying Simon and Rachel's conversation with the novelist and screenwriter Irvine Welsh. As you may have guessed, it's time for the next instalment of our new segment. This week, we hear from Phoebe Hurst. When Simon and Rachel spoke to Phoebe, she was the managing editor at Vice, but now she's assistant G1 editor at The Guardian. And she's going to tell you about a piece of advice she wished she'd had at the start of her career.
Sounds a bit obvious, but it is really helpful and easy to lose sight of. I think it's basically just to read as much as you can. I know that when I was starting out, I spent a lot of time, writing pitches, applying for jobs, updating my website, researching for stories, and all of that's really important to be a journalist and really part of your job. But just as important is making sure you've got enough input and enough inspiration in the things that you're reading. So I found that as soon as I kind of carved out time in my week, just an hour in the morning or more in the evenings to just sit and read, ideally not on a screen, I felt like my writing improved. I got way more ideas, and I just felt a lot more connected to why I wanted to be a journalist in the first place. And one of those reasons was because I really love writing and I really love improving my craft. And the best way to do that is by reading as much as you can. Just not just kind of scrolling through articles on Twitter, which I also am guilty of doing a lot, but reading novels, magazines, stuff from outside the UK. My local library has a really good thing where you can access free magazines if you have an e-reader. So I can read The New Yorker for free, which is really good. So there's lots of kind of ways that you can access, different types of material without necessarily having to spend loads of money on subscriptions. It's just read as much as you can.
That was Phoebe Hurst. And if you were interested in what Phoebe had to say, you can listen to our full interview with her via our website, www.alwaystakenotes.com. Now back to Simon and Rachel's conversation with Irvine Welsh.
Beyond that kind of reflexive criticism that came when Trainspotting came out, what's been the role of using drugs in your experience as a writer? We saw that you'd said elsewhere that you felt it had given you an edge.
I think not so much the drugs of being, you don't want to be writing when you're on drugs, basically. You'd rather be just dancing or sort of staring at walls or something like that, But I think that not so much the drugs themselves, but not so much the intoxication and the sort of and the split consciousness and that you get. You're interfering with your own levels of consciousness and you're looking at things in a different way. And I think that part of it was useful. But I think more useful to me was the kind of people that you meet and the kind of situations you get into, sort of adventures you get into, through all these subcultures that are kind of attached to drugs. I think that was very useful for me.
You said that writing Marabou Stop Nightmares and Filth in the same way was difficult in terms of getting to the head of a protagonist who commits very violent acts and does some pretty despicable things. How do you get into a character's head when they are, doing that sort of thing?
Basically, you look at the pain that character's in, and you try to, you think, so this person's in pain, they've made all these terrible choices because of the pain. So you try and understand the pain and the confusion in the sense of being trapped, and then you kind of write from that perspective. To me, it's not so much, the problem is not so much getting into the head of characters like that, it's getting out of it. It asks a lot of you just to write a character like that. And I think you have to be very careful. You have to manage your kind of life and your relationships very carefully when you embark on a project like that. And I didn't really realise that at the time. I didn't think that it's, it kind of spills over, or if you start writing in that kind of character, that it's not conducive to sort of good and healthy relationships. So I sort of, one of the things that's been really useful to me is like getting to know actors, and because I remember like James McAvoy was doing Filth, and he was playing the Robertson character, and I thought, he'd just give this massively intense performance, and he'd go away still in character, and he'd go up to his hotel room, and he'd go, I'll be down in about half an hour for a drink and all that. I thought, nah, I'm not going to see James again. Like, he's going to just lie in bed and stay in character. He's going to get up and do this the next again day. And then he would come down half an hour later, and he would be like kind of happy, kind of go-lucky, cheerful, smiling James McAvoy again. Like he's left that character up in the room. And I was fascinated. I was asking him how he did this, and I've asked other actors how they've done this and all that. And they actually do, some of them just do actually de-roll. They just kind of look at, they ask themselves, they do that thing that actors do, like, as there 3 ways you like this character, 3 ways you're not like this character, and you kind of, you give yourself permission to be yourself again. And I kind of started to do that, when I write a difficult character. I started to sort of to do that, basically, to sort of to orientate myself and my own kind of personal values and morality, and try to sort of make sure that I get back to that and I leave the character on the page.
Another question that we love to put to novelists on the show is whether in the vernacular we've, I suppose, developed or stolen, they're a plotter or a plunger. So whether they're someone who has a narrative worked out in advance, or whether they are someone who just dives in and follows their nose or their subconscious. I think you alluded to earlier getting stuff up on the wall, which I wonder if that's the classic screenwriter way. But where between those two poles do you fall? And is it different for your prose and for your TV projects?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I could see it as a continuum, and kind of much more sort of, you're much more plot driven in TV shows, because that's what they are basically, and you're much more character driven on and diving in the novel. But you move along that continuum sometimes, depending on just how you're feeling, or the subject matter, or what's taking your fancy. I mean, Marble Stock Nightmares, I had a lot of that plotted out in my head before I actually wrote, and because that was like, I was only writing the thing for about 5 weeks or something like that, but it took, it was sticking with me for months and months. A book like Glue would be the very reverse of that, where I had nothing to write about at all. I thought, what am I going to write about? It's like the publishers want another novel, I should write something. And I started to basically have these guys sitting in this pub, and I thought, I'll make the pub in Germany, and I'll make them at the Munich Beer Festival. So I had these guys just rapping about, basically, 3 guys joking about another guy's foreskin, basically, which was kind of, seemingly a kind of trivial way to start things, but it kind of got you into the characters. Got the character, Juice Terry came from that. It was one of my best characters, I think. And then I sort of, I thought, well, what is this about? What are their relationships? And let's move back 10 years to see what they were like 10 years ago. So I did that, as a device, basically. I thought, well, let's keep that there, and let's move 10 years ahead. Maybe they're no longer friends. Maybe the reason, the roots of why they're no longer friends is explained kind of not in the present, but in the past, basically. So they maybe made time bombs for themselves to sort of that have come home to sort of roost, basically. And just doing these kind of things generates a great deal of information. You can't do that kind of thing with every book, but it seemed to, and then I actually took them back to being kids, to the 5-year-old, and thinking like, what was their life like then, what kind of relationships did they have with their parents and their families and all that. And so I think that, that you can do that, you can generate a great deal of information, and this, and that was a very, very character-driven book. But again, if you create these characters and spend a bit of time with them, the plot starts to come, the storyline will start to emerge.
Is that why some characters recur across books? They'll make a cameo in one and then they'll become a protagonist in their own right. Is that because they've just generated their own plots in your head?
Yeah, I mean, you think it's almost like having a set of tools in a box and all that. You think, I might never need this particular kind of screwdriver, and then you suddenly see that, there's something that, that you've got this unusual kind of sort of star-headed screw or something like that. You need to sort of get out and all that, and I think that you kind of, you can go into that, you think, well, what have I actually got here that works for this? Like, when I did Crime, I wanted it to be about a guy who'd been abused and but who also had some kind of power, And I thought, well, who would have that kind of power? A cop would have that kind of power. Who would be attracted to a very kind of serious crimes, and that kind of somebody from that background. So I thought about Lennox's character from Filth, he was he wasn't a minor character, but it wasn't anything like the main character, because I always thought there's something about this character. There's something about him. He seems to be a man of secrets. That's what I've sort of ascertained from Filth and all that. So I wanted to try and find out what these secrets would be. So Crime was like an investigation of the character. It was like a sort of, rather than the actual, the conventional murder mystery. It's more, it's all that, but it's also about an existential thriller. It's about the character and what they're trying to find themselves, and they're trying to solve the mystery of themselves, which I think ultimately is what everybody's trying to do.
Your books have often, back to Trainspotting, been perceived as shocking by some people. Do you think that there has been a desire to shock, either conscious or unconscious, in your work, and has that changed over your career as a published author?
Yeah, I've never really been massively sort of never been massively conscious of that kind of urge. But then you look back and you look at the material, and sometimes I'm typing away and I look and I think, fuck, where did this come from? I just write this. What is all this? And you have that kind of moment, like, what's my mother going to think about this? What's my girlfriend going to think about this? And all these sort of kind of, and then you think, well, these are good feelings to have. They're really good. That means you're tapping into something. If you're worried about this kind of social embarrassment of it, so yeah. I think that obviously there is some kind of, I think every artist, whether they're musicians or writers or painters or whatever, they want to get people's attention. Basically, there is a very narcissistic attention-seeking need that kind of underpins all of art, as well as a sort of a desire to communicate. There is a sort of there's a kind of sort of look at me, this is what's happening here thing. But hopefully it's a subconscious thing, and I'm not massively aware of it in my everyday life.
Could we talk now about your playwriting and screenwriting work? How did you first get into that, and how do you find the process of writing in those forms different to novel writing?
I worked with a guy called Paul Pinson, who was a director in Edinburgh at Boiler House Theatre. We did a piece called Head State, which was about the kind of like post-rave burnout, really. It was a sort of performance piece, and it was an interesting experience for me. I liked working with, I'm quite writers, if you're a novelist, you're on your own basically, and you're playing God and all that. And it's great, it's great, but it's quite lonely. And I do like working with other people, and you do learn a lot when you're working with other people. So I got into theatre from doing that, and I think basically I got into film writing and TV writing. Through adaptation, through having sort of my stuff adapted, and through getting into the nuts and bolts of these industries and the processes, and finding it quite an interesting thing to do, and finding it, it's great when because when people want to adapt your stuff for screen or stage, it's usually because they sort of they're really into it and they like it and all that, but the reasons for liking it are often very different from yours, and the perspective on it is often very different from yours. And that's incredibly enlightening, and it's very stimulating to work with people who have who see things in your stuff that you've never seen yourself, basically, and they bring that to your attention.
With other screenwriters in particular we've talked to, there's been this division that we've often heard about between the kind of British tradition of a single writer working, maybe getting notes from a producer, but largely kind of being on their own, and this American showrunner writer's room tradition. What have you had experience in both those camps, and what's your preference?
Yes, I have, and they operate in very, very different ways, and they're both I think that the idea of just getting on with it, or just you and something else, or you and a couple of writers and a producer, or you as as a writer and a producer, is great, and because you can just get on with it. You can have you can have quite a strong voice, basically, and but also it's like, I think that the whole showrunner model, the writers' room model, is also great as well. It just offers a different set of opportunities. The opportunity to work with people and learn from them. So I think that they both have their place in terms of the development of a show. I mean, I'm agnostic as to which one I would think would be best, and which one I prefer sort of working with. I think you get a lot from both environments. I think that's fundamental, to being a writer, is the opportunity to be able to work in diverse environments.
You've collaborated with Dean Kavanagh on some of your screenwriting projects, including Wedding Bells. How does that partnership kind of work in practice?
It's kind of, it's a weird partnership, because we've been at this for a long time, and we're kind of, you actually find yourself kind of thinking like each other. It's funny. It's like, when we're working on something, there's almost like a third person in the room, which is a sort of like somewhere where Dean and I kind of meet, and there's a kind of Venn diagram of when it crosses over, and that becomes like a third person in the room, and it's almost like a third voice in the room. And sometimes we joke, "Oh, that's the other voice," basically. But it's great because we're close friends as well, and you have to have that sort of trust and intimacy with someone. You can get we sort of we let each other go out there, and we pull each other back from and all that sort of stuff. So we're quite good at doing that, but we tend not to overwrite each other. We're quite careful about what it is. We really do give it a great deal of thought what this piece is, and we kind of map out what where this needs to go. So we're much more we plan quite a lot. So we don't really we'll go away and write scenes each, or we'll go away and write episodes each, and it's quite interesting because that you actually forget which bits you've written and which bits he's written, because there is such a sense of ownership from the whole project.
I wanted to ask about the significance of America for you, both professionally and personally. You've lived there in Chicago, also in Miami. But thinking about it as a writer who broke through with such an association with place, with writing about Scotland and so forth, what has America meant to you, and what has it offered you?
I think it was, it was a great experience. I mean, I've lived 10 years there, and I'm still there part-time. I've still got a place there. And I think it's just a great experience living anywhere. Like, I mean, I lived in Holland for a couple of years. I lived in Ireland for 5 years. And these are great experiences. They're just, it's a great thing to be able to do as a writer, to live in a different country, basically, because you've everything, the way you look at the world is completely sort of turned on its head in a lot of ways. You sort of and you actually get a different perspective on where you come from. You get a massive different perspective on home as a result of being away from home. It's like, I think you think all the issues about kind of Scotland's place in Britain, Britain's place in Europe, and all this sort of stuff. I was never really that bothered about them until I sort of started to look at it from a kind of almost like an overseas viewpoint. Somebody who's not immersed in it, and you look at the kind of you look at the lunacies of your own society. And we tend to we would look at the lunacy of somewhere like the United States from Britain and think, oh, this stuff about guns and it's, it's just nonsense and crazy and all this kind of stuff. And then you think, well, we have a queen basically, and aristocrats in the House of Lords and stuff like that, and practically all the prime ministers have gone to one school. So it's like you think to yourself, well, this is quite nuts as well. How what a weird kind of place we are too. So you do get a different impression from where you live from abroad, basically, and I think that filters into your writing. I think it's a very it's a great asset to a writer to be able to travel.
We're coming towards the end of our time, so a final question from me. Much has been sort of said about the recurring themes in your work, drug use, class, Scottish identity. I saw someone say that they think you're interested in the exercise of free will. What do you think the kind of themes that you've returned to over the course of your career have been?
I think I think most the big theme that keeps coming back to me is that for example, I don't think Trainspotting is a book about drugs at all. I think it is a book about people trying to adjust to a world without paid work, which is where we're all going now. Originally that was like the post-industrial working classes that had to make that adjustment. Now it's professions like journalism. It's even things like law are going to kind of be, they're going to feel all that now with the information technology and the whole kind of robotics and sort of artificial intelligence and all that. So we are in this precipice of what are we as people, what are we as human beings. I think that if work defines us and we're not sort of paid for what we do and what is the measure of us now, and I think this is the big existential questions that we're asking. I think that it feeds into so much. It feeds into the self, and it feeds into sort of mental illness and anxiety and everything like that. So I think we've created this very sort of strange zoo that we're in, and it's not really kind of good for us as humans. It's not really sort of great for our species. This kind of world that we're creating, and it's putting kind of challenges onto us, and so I think that's a great, that to me is the recurrent theme of it's the recurrent theme of my fiction, but so I think it has to be a recurrent theme in practically all fiction now, because this is the great questions that we face.
A couple of final questions from me, one kind of broad and one narrow. The broad one is what's next? What are your projects you're working on? And then the narrow one was, I was interested when you said you lived in Ireland. Does Ireland still have this situation for artists and writers where you don't have any income tax?
I think they stopped that now. They did, when I was there, they certainly did. It was, I always remember it, because I went there because my wife was doing a degree there at University College, and I was there, and I remember having a conversation with Roddy Doyle, that and I was kind of I was pulling Roddy's leg a bit, saying that you don't pay any tax, and the guy who's pulling your pint of Guinness pays £50 pence in the pound for tax, and he goes, yeah, that's just the way it is. That's just the sort of what happens. And there I was, like in Ireland, maybe about 2 years later, basically, which I didn't expect to be, and I was in the same position, So it was, it's a fabulous thing for writers. I don't know how fabulous it is for the society as a whole or the economy as a whole, but I think that they did set their kind of stall out to kind of be a sort of to promote Irish culture, to promote Ireland as a sort of cultural kind of sort of powerhouse, basically, and to build on its sort of traditions and all that. So I can see why they did it. I can see why it made sense to people there. Whether it's socially it makes any sense at all in broader terms, I don't know.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what are your next projects?
All right, yeah, sorry, Simon. Yeah, I'm writing kind of season 2 of Crime based on the book The Long Knives, which is out. So it's quite interesting to you kind of you think to yourself, well, because a lot of the great thing about a novel is you can just go anywhere, and I've got like some of the Long Knives is kind of set in Tehran and all that, after the the kind of Iranian Revolution and stuff like that, and it's like you think to yourself, well, I mean, you're not going to be, you're not going to have the budget to shoot this in Tehran, basically, like, so you have to sort of you start making these kind of adaptations, and you start thinking, well, we're not going to be able to have all this number of characters, and we're not going to be able to have this mad sort of kind of set piece or this set piece. So you do kind of start thinking about the practicalities of it, and how you can tell a kind of an interesting story televisually. And it's also the other things as well, is that some of the actors in season 1 were brilliant, so you want to give them something to do, basically. You want to develop their characters. So television, it has a different identity. It starts to have a different identity to the world you've created. Your televisual world of crime is becomes very different to the Long Knives world of crime, and you have to kind of respect both. But it is quite an interesting thing. And I'm also, I've always got the book out as well. I've written a novella for John King and Alan Warner. We're doing our SEAL Club thing. We did one just during lockdown, which was a great thing to do. So I've written another one, which is a very kind of sort of raucous kind of Scottish story, really. And we're doing the Trainspotting musical. I've written all the songs with my music partner Steve Mack. We've done all the songs for the Trainspotting musical. We're going to record them as an album, and we've got a really good cast, and we've developed the book. And so we're just really with Phil McIntyre. We're just really looking now for the theatres to start opening up again. To West End theatre land to start opening up, and then we'll be ready to stick that in there. Got a couple of projects in America. One with Bret Easton Ellis, which is going to be like a sort of a kind of podcast-ish kind of sort of sequential storytelling thing. And the other one is like a sort of was based on this novel that I wrote but never published, because I kind of I might actually republish it or rewrite it, but it just seemed to me to be more of a kind of a screenplay, basically, or a set of screenplays than an actual novel. It just came across more visually to me, So I thought, well, let's get it as a TV project. So looking at that, Dean and I are doing a sort of a Berlin show with Jonas Ackerlund, who's a old Parliament and a really great director. I've worked with him for years, so we're kind of working on this. It's kind of basically about the development of techno music in Germany, and about the sort of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and this leading up to Love Parade and all that. So that's the kind of area that interests me a lot. So yeah, just going with that as well.
Just a few projects. I did read an interview with you a few years ago where you said you're too busy to do fucking podcasts, but we are thrilled that you made space to speak to us. Wishing you all the very best with everything going forward, and thanks again.
Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.
That was the Always Take Notes interview with Irvine Welsh. He's on Twitter and Instagram at Irvine Welsh and Irvine.Welsh respectively, and his latest book, The Long Knives, is published by Jonathan Cape. We wanted to draw your attention to our crowdfunding page on Patreon. If you've been enjoying Always Take Notes, please do consider supporting us there. It helps us to keep the podcast going.
If you support us on Patreon, you can get a great selection of rewards, including a shout out on the show and a selection of successful magazine pictures.
If you pledge $10 a month, you also get a free 2-month trial to Otter, worth $26, alongside the other rewards. Otter offers automated transcription and live note-taking for in-person and virtual meetings. I found it to be a huge help when organising interview material.
Thanks again for supporting Always Take Notes.
Hello, it's us again. Simon, what was your takeaway from the interview with Irvine?
I really enjoyed, not for the first time on the podcast, unpacking the experience of having a kind of massive zeitgeist-defining book, particularly what it was like dealing with Trainspotting. I thought also when he talked about the whole kind of difficult second album syndrome and trying to follow that up. I think he said he tried to like produce a novel in which he just photocopied his gas bills or something at one stage, and how he had to get reined in with that. So I thought he spoke very candidly about that. I was also fascinated by the whole fact that he doesn't have a literary agent, which I think I was, we love to get into this kind of nitty gritty conversation. And I thought that, a novelist of his stature, but also the fact that he just had experience with contracts from his work in local government. And so just went it alone. Although his point, which was just like always ask for more money till they say stop, I think is a sound one that our listeners should follow. What about you?
Yes, I was astounded by his creative output today. After a hit like Trainspotting, probably never had to work again. But the fact that he has so many things on the go was, I thought, admirable. And yes, enjoyed hearing about how he puts himself in the shoes of his unpleasant protagonists and does a realistic job of creating their voice. And I can't wait to see Trainspotting as a musical, personally. What have you been up to, Simon?
I have been doing magazine stuff mostly. So the kind of closing bits with this big 1843 story of getting the fact-checking responses back in and then going and doing final interviews and just pulling it together in the next few days and having to get it down to length. So business as usual, but it's been good. What about you, Rachel?
Look forward to reading it. I have a piece coming out this week, in fact, about A24, a production and distribution company. And also a friend of the podcast, Tom Rowley, formerly of The Economist, has found a premises for his new independent bookshop in southwest London. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. I think he's doing some crowdfunding now to make sure it's kitted out with all the nicest things. So any listeners in that area that would like to support him, I'm sure he'd welcome it.
I would definitely second that. Tom Rowley, the nicest man in journalism, is now the nicest man in bookselling. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acomb.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvine. Our score is by Jess Danheiser, and our graphic design is by James Edgar.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram at Always Take Notes. We're on Twitter at Take Notes Always. If you'd like to support our crowdfunding page on Patreon, we're under Always Take Notes. And if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes or get in touch with us via our website, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.